Hello everybody and welcome to yet another Tuesday edition of Taco Tech Tips. Today we're going to talk about something that I get a lot of questions about, and that is dyno corrections. What are they? Why do we run them? What's the purpose of them? And our test car for this to show is a Chrysler 300C with, ooh, look at that boy, oh, Whipple. We're not going to be showing any runs of this car. I'm just going to show you what we have for data. Alright, so here we are, and sorry about the screen. I need to get a screen capture program to make these a little bit prettier, better, easier to read. But here we are. So this was this 300C, and when it came in the last time and I tuned it, we had a peak power of right up here, around 560 horsepower. So 503 foot-pounds of torque. And this is a corrected value. So what does it mean to have a corrected value? Well, let's show you. If I come over here to power, and we look at the uncorrected power and the uncorrected torque, what we'll see is the numbers just went up. Now we're to 569 and 511 foot-pounds. Well, this is how much power it actually made. This is what the vehicle put down on the rollers at the moment that it was here on the dyno. And what we can do is we can look at some of the other parameters for this car. We have the air-fuel ratio here, shows you where we're at. And we have our boost level here, about 8.77 pounds per square inch of boost. So that tells us what we were making for boost and what we were making for air fuels, but that's not really what we're looking for as far as what decides the correction. So the dyno has a weather probe, and the weather probe, in fact, let me grab it and show you here. This here is the weather station. Oops, we're upside down. So it's basically got a little fan and a little temperature sensor and a barometer, or it's got a temperature sensor, a barometric pressure sensor, and a humidity sensor inside it. And the fan just draws the air in that's around it, and then it connects to the dyno itself. And what this does is it helps us calculate accurately what the air density in the dyno cell is. So some people run numbers based off of what the air density outside is, but that's not even really accurate because you have to calculate what's actually in the room where you're currently set up. So if we look here, we have our humidity, 36.85, and this was on July 17th. So let's go back over here. We have pressure. Pressure was 14.81. We have really high atmospheric pressure here. We're basically at sea level. Temperature, 81.4. So it kind of tells you it was a little bit warm day. It wasn't super hot, but overall what that does is it takes a standard correction. And when we show our standard correction right here in correction factor, it was a 0.98. Now, when the car came back, I want to show you what we have. We're going to unhide it. Boom, there we go. So the car came back and it made 588.06 horsepower. In fact, let me hide the other one. And 536 foot-pounds of torque. So it made more power when it came back, right? Well, if you look here, our correction factor is now 0.95. And the reason why it's 0.95, let me pull up. In fact, let me go to double graph so it's easier to read. If we unhide it, so we were 0.98 last time, and this time we're 0.95. And if we look at the reasons why it's 0.95, our humidity, well, we're a little bit more humid than it was. It was a little drier last time. And pressure, we're actually a little higher pressure even than last time. And the coup de grace temperature, way colder, 61.7 degrees versus 81.4. So naturally, it's going to make a little bit more power. In fact, because this is supercharged, it actually did something else too. Let's show you the real fun one here. If we look at the, under dyno, MISC, you have to find these sometimes. Under pressure, we actually made almost 3/4 of a pound more boost. This part right here is just how fast I floored it. If you were to have graphed throttle position. I wasn't fully floored till a little bit later on that pull, but anyway, you can see it's making more boost. And the reason why it's making more boost, even though it's supercharged, is because we have higher atmospheric density. We have higher air density. So more boost equals more power, right? So if we look at this, it's not really comparable. This is the same car, same tune, same setup, everything's the same. So it made a different amount of power. So that makes it really hard to compare runs from one day to another. But that's where the fun corrected numbers come in. So when we look at the power corrected and we look at the torque corrected, we see that those two are very similar now. In fact, if I zoom outside of where I didn't floor it at the same time, we are almost identical. It's pretty wild. Very similar numbers when it's all corrected. And that's what the advantage of having a really proper dyno is. In fact, up here, it actually pulled a little bit, not pulled a little bit of timing, but it ran a little bit less timing because it was making more boost. And so it did make a little bit less power, although it is making more power. Because if you look at the correct or the uncorrected numbers, it is definitely making more power. But let's go back to corrected. So that's why we run corrections on the dyno, is so that when the car comes in one day and it comes back 6 months later, yeah, pretty close. It was December, or it was July when it came in the first time, and then it was November when it came in this time. We can put it on the dyno and have a good comparison. So let's say the customer had actually changed something on the car. Now we'd be able to see if it gained or lost power based on the corrected values. If you're running uncorrected, let's say we had ran them uncorrected and he added an intake, and instead of making 588, it made 580, we'd think the car gained power. We'd think it gained 11 horsepower. But in reality, it would have actually lost a little bit of power if you were to correct the numbers. So it's really important that whatever dyno you go to runs corrections. Even if they print you this nice, pretty big number on it because it's a cold day and the car made a bunch of power, just for the dyno queen numbers, you do have to remember that if you are trying to use the dyno as a tool, which is what it's intended for, that you have to run corrections. The other thing we'll get into real quick is something called smoothing. So you see on dyno jets and some other dynos, they have a smoothing factor. And what this is it's basically the dyno graph is actually just a bunch of data. It's a raw data file. And in that data file, it has samples. Each time it takes a sample, it basically graphs a point. And so what smoothing does is it changes the interpolation between the points. So how much it's going to wiggle between the points. So if I go over here and I go to unsmoothed, see it's a little bit wigglier because I had a high, a low, a high, a low, you see. And so it often yields slightly higher numbers, not a lot higher. We're like a horsepower higher, yeah, 1. But this number is technically more accurate because this is all of the individual samples with a hard line drawn between them. But some cars that have, like, say your wheel is a little bit crooked or you have a flat spot in a tire, it'll show up on the dyno and you'll see crazy spikes and jitters. 4-cylinder cars spike and jitter more because you actually have individual acceleration events from each cylinder firing, whereas this is a V8, and so there is 8 cylinders to distribute it among, so they look a little bit smoother. So anyway, let's unzoom here. Come on. Unzoom again. Go all the way back. There we go. So, uncorrected looks a little bit different.
So that's what I have for you guys today. Thanks for watching, and as always, please subscribe if you like this video, and we'll get more coming.